Well, apparently we're live again, and welcome to Searching for Sparks. I'm Tim Motzer, and today my guest, who I'm very excited to have here, is Brian Boland, one of my best friends in the planet as we know it, and an amazing mix engineer, recordist, producer, bass player, educator, musician, on and on. So, without further ado, Brian and I are going to get into it for a while. So welcome. Hello, Brian. Let's see if we can get you in here. There
Hey
you
Tim,
are.
we're live.
I'm always blown away when this works. It's fantastic.
I've never used this before. This is cool.
Yeah. So welcome to Searching for Sparks. And man,
Happy to be here.
it's so great to see you. You
We've been
know,
trying to do this for a while. This is awesome.
I know finally I have a little bit of time. So it's like, now's the time, and it's such a great time to do this too, to chat and talk about inspiration, creativity, and positivity. With everything that's going on in our planet, it just seems like there's the artists and forward and positive thinking people are coming forward right now, and I'm feeling a really nice positive vibe happening, and
Yeah.
and this teamwork that you and I have been doing for the last year has been just amazing, just getting that back on. So I want to talk about that, and also your history, and how did you, like, I guess my first question would be is how did you get started in music, and what was your initial impulse to be a musician, b start recording musicians, that kind of thing? What was the first music you remember that blew you out, those kinds of things, those areas?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It's whenever someone asks anybody creative that question, it's your brain immediately goes back to a picture somewhere in the, between 5 and 10 years old, right?
Yeah.
So it's like instant. It's amazing. And for me, it was just kind of listening to lots of different music when I was a kid, whether it be my friends that had older brothers or sisters, and I was just gravitating to that. My dad listening to everything from classical music to like the Stones and Buddy Holly on the radio and all that, and like Motown. So like all that. My grandmother was into jazz, so like I heard that when I was young, and I was like, oh, this is really cool. And then kind of was always played a little like drums in elementary school, and then just kind of like became more of a fan than anything else, I would say, for a while. And then didn't really pick up the bass till later, but just got really into like the Police in like the early 80s. Like growing up in New Jersey, right outside Manhattan, there's like the birth of hip hop. So it was like,
Yeah.
I mean, I remember going to Yankee games with my friend's older brother and like hanging out with like Grandmaster Flash and Melly Mel and like the Furious Five guys going, whoa. And it was like in 1987, I'm 13 years old,
Wow.
and I knew who they were. And it was like, LL Cool J cassettes and like all that stuff was like just massive. And at the same time, like, getting into prog rock and like metal was popular. So it was like all this stuff. So it wasn't like you were never pinned into one thing. It was like, and then just started researching more and then going backwards to Zeppelin and all that stuff. So, and getting like my first like cool like the 3-in-1 stereos with the radio, the cassette, and then the turntable on it, in like second grade, and like my aunt's buying me like the Police and Hall and Oates and just stuff that was like popular at the time, and just that's when I guess I started like wondering how like people playing music kind of gravitated onto this little cassette or the record, and then I started like I had the dual cassette boombox, and you'd make mixtapes. Like you'd kind of wait. And you knew like one of your favorite songs could be on the radio, and as soon as you heard it, you hit record. Then you stopped it, and then you waited for the next one, and you just kind of hand recorded mixtapes, and then eventually, kind of splicing cassettes a little bit.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
We all
So
do that stuff, I think,
yeah, exactly. Like we
Exactly.
all kind of have similar stories.
Yeah.
And then it wasn't really until I guess junior year in high school, a friend of mine was a singer, and she was approached by this guy who had a studio in Cedar Grove, New Jersey. And she's like, oh, why don't you come with me? And I said, okay. And as soon as I walked into the studio, I was like, okay, I get it now. Like, that's where kind of I was, because at the time, like I said, I hadn't really even picked up bass until like freshman year in college, when people were just like sophomore year. Friends of mine who I was recording were like, just pick it back up, man. I was like, well, it's been since elementary school, and like, just do it. So before that, it was junior in high school, and I said, okay, I get it. I was just glued to what the engineer was doing and fascinated by,
Wow.
just the amalgam of wires and knobs and stuff, and just curiosity struck. So I
Yeah.
ended up hanging out there for a while, and getting lunch for people and stuff like that. I just got my driver's license, and so I was like, I'll be here whenever you want. So then that kind of happened, and then that took off, and then went to William Patterson, where I met so many of our mutual friends, and
Yeah.
by way of that, you actually, um, and just started the journey of recording with amazing teachers like Karen Kohler. She is an amazing engineer. First day, she was like, okay, we're going to tune drums. We're going to learn how to tune drums. Don't worry about what the microphones do yet, stuff like
Wow.
that. So, and then Jim Barg was another amazing engineer, and of course Bob Both, who's famous for kind of having one of those magical stories where the engineer got sick one day and he started recording James Brown, and he recorded like 6 James Brown's records. So it was like really cool. So he was always like a nice mentor to all of us.
Wow.
And back then, there was only 5 or 6 kids in the audio program, because there was no audio engineer schools. Full Sail was very small at the time too. This is early '90s, you know. So that's how it started.
That sounds so exciting and so amazing. It's like everybody, I love hearing everybody's stories of the way into music or engineering, or I talked to Chris Kuzmi yesterday, his way into brewing beer as
Yeah,
well.
that was fascinating. I actually watched the whole thing. I loved it.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
And, we have a lot of history, the three of us, so that's really cool.
Oh yeah.
So you worked at the studio for how long? Or how long were you around?
I was there. I was just there till I went to college. So I was there like off and on, like a year. And the guy who owned it was like on the Grammy nomination committee, and just kind of
Wow.
more than anything, it was just kind of learning. Where I grew up in West Orange, there was like the House of Music. I went to school with Cool from Cool and the Gang's son, Hakeem Bell, who's now an amazing producer himself.
Yeah.
And all these records were made in my town, and like I didn't know. And Bill Laswell had a studio there for years too. Pleasant Valley Sunday by the Monkees was written about Pleasant Valley Way, which is a street in West Orange. So it was all this stuff, and it just kind of like, I'm like, well, where has this been? Like, it was just like this little secret thing that I never knew about until I got into recording.
Yeah.
So I was there for till like a year off and on, just like interning, getting lunch, cleaning up, whatever. And then when I started at school at William Patterson, it was kind of like being able to get into the studio after you got your feet wet in the classes. That's when I started recording our friends and doing first EPs and stuff in like 1993, 94. And then I met I was valeting at a restaurant, and Prince Strickland Elwood was bartending, and we just got to chatting and became friends. And he was already working at Green Street Recording, and he had already finished school.
I didn't
And he
know
said, well, yeah. And he said, well, hey, we're always looking for interns. And I was like, I'd heard the name before. And then when I walked in, I was like, okay, this is a legit studio, with the plaques on the wall, and like Public Enemy, Run DMC, Curtis Blow, Ice Cube, all the stuff. And
right? A legendary studio.
legendary. Oh yeah, legendary for many genres, but especially the early hip hop stuff.
Yeah.
And amazing engineers. I mean, anybody who's taught me anything besides my teachers in school, all the just superb engineers that work there. I owe a lot to them. There's so many people to name: Rod Wade, Jamie Staub, Chris Shaw, Nick Sansano. I mean, Danny Medorsky, Prince Strickland, of course, Phil Painson. I mean, there's just all those guys were just unbelievable, and they were always just come on in,
It's a community you were a part of, really,
Yeah, and I just, that's how you start, just cleaning, stuff and getting there, and then eventually when they're like, okay, he's not going to steal anything, then you get the keys, and then you start answering phones and assisting and stuff like that, and it just became like a very important part of my life, and was there for quite a few years actually, until Prince and I got a deal with Elwood, and then you know, kind of through that studio because a friend of ours had a band called Market, and Bob Power was helping produce that. Fantastic band, kind of like trip hop stuff from the 90s. And their manager was one of the band member, Adam Kling's brother, Sam. And he was like, he had just heard some stuff. We were just messing around in the studio, like early versions of Cakewalk D88, syncing stuff, MIDI, like, just
Have
sampling and
fun. Yeah.
having fun. Exactly. And then it just turned out to be something that Chris Blackwell liked. And,
What year was that?
that was 99. We got signed.
Mm.
We were
And,
kind of messing around for a couple of years and
yeah,
shopping,
yeah,
back when you shopped the records.
yeah, I'm trying to remember when we first met. Would that have been 96 or
It
97?
was like 96, 97. We did like Beta Mix, and
Yeah,
then at Prince's studio, actually,
yeah,
in Jersey City. And then 97? We did
probably.
Jazz Heads, and then Global Illage. I forget
Yeah.
which one came first.
Yeah, we did Jazz Heads first, and that was with Ari Honig and Chris
Yeah.
Kuzny, who we talked to yesterday, and myself and Ben Bicardo. And that was at Jim Hamilton's basement studio at the time.
Yeah.
And but the first memory I have of meeting you is I'm trying to remember. I think it was Chris. I said, I wish there was someone who could mix these tracks, a couple early recordings, early multi-tracks. And he's like, yeah, I have a friend in New York or Jersey, Brian. We should take it over there. And I still remember that day. And I think we came to your house in Jersey City or wherever that was.
That was Prince's studio, I think, in Jersey
Okay,
City. Yeah.
like on the second floor, or
Yeah.
I perceived it to be a second floor, and you were there, and like
Yeah.
you put it on. I remember you putting the music on and just like pressing play, and it started playing, and you balanced it, and you just looked at me like, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I know
That
what
sounds
this
about
is,
right.
and that was one of the first sparks. That was the first spark in terms of
Yeah.
working together, and then you mixed those, and then we made the Jazz Heads Avant Whatnot album.
Yeah, that was super special, like that, the Jazz Heads, and then moving on to Global Illage, just being, I just got a sense when we were recording that, especially the Avant Whatnot record, it was so much fun. And then Jim's studio in the basement becoming such a kind of a staple,
Yeah.
For a couple of many things that we've done together and many other things that I've done with the kind of William Patterson diaspora of bands, that have gone on through the years. We kind of all just,
there. Yeah.
yeah. And just an amazing place, and just a great place to Jim's just so welcoming. And also it was a great place to kind of cut my teeth, to go to the next level
Yeah.
of what I wanted to do, just kind of like that was like another woodshed, after school, and then combined with Green Street and all the other studios I was kind of bouncing around in. That was a really important part, I think. And I think a lot of it had to do with what I was capturing too. I think, all you guys are, that's the thing, it's much easier when you capture people who know how to play their instruments well and all have a good spirit,
Yeah, there was a lot of magic happening on both of the sessions, actually, and you captured that and added to it, and it was how it was captured. And even back in those days, like, when I started recording and learning about recording was probably like 1980 or something. That's when I lived in Dayton, Ohio. And the bass player in the band that I was in at the time, and it was the first band that I had ever written music in. So it was like a progressive rock band in Dayton, Ohio. So we were having a blast, and he wrote using a 4-track TAC machine. And eventually, I was like, well, I have to get one of those too. So I got a 4-track machine, and we set them side by side, and we started bouncing 4 down to 2, and adding more, and then mixing stuff. And that's where it started. And then as you move forward and fast forward to 97, you're using ADATs at that time, right?
Yep.
It went from reel to reel to ADAT and all kinds of different media throughout those years.
Yeah.
And now we are on the famous laptop and towers.
Yeah, but I think it's good that we think we're fortunate to be in that kind of niche of generations, to where you start out with 4-track, and for me it was half inch. I did everything from like live to half inch with jazz bands to, 24 track, 2 inch, 48 track, linking them up, syncing them up, all that stuff, which is great. And then now it's still great, but you have the mentality of committing to certain things to where you can kind of go off onto an infinite number of tracks and an infinite number of decisions. And sometimes it just kind of, it just makes everything out of focus, sometimes too much for me, so you have to know when to. It's good. What I mean is it's good that we can know when to go, wait a minute, let me just see what I have before I keep going into the ether of cut, copy, paste, so mistakes are good.
I remember one of my favorite memories. Well, there's many favorite memories, but this memory illustrates your work ethic. And I remember when we were doing the final mixes of the Jazz Heads album.
I know what you're going to say.
It had been a long ass weekend, and I just remember everybody had pretty much gone to bed or passed out in couches everywhere, and it was just you and I left.
Yeah.
And we were almost done, and you're printing everything to DAT.
Mm-hmm.
We got to the very last song, which was, I think, Triangulus.
It was, yes.
Yeah. And you printed that, we thought, and then we're done.
That's it.
And started unpatching everything. And let's just listen real quick. And it wasn't there.
Yeah, the last mix wasn't there.
And it was like, I don't know, 5 a.m. or something.
Yeah, I was fried. It's like a mistake that it happens to people. There's billions of stories of people falling asleep in record at the transport, recording a vocal to what I did. You know what I mean? So, it's just one of those things where I was, instead of going, what, let's do this tomorrow, we were just like, no. And then we found out that the last mix wasn't printed.
Yeah. And what I loved about that was you immediately said, no problem. Started getting all the patch cable. I remember what I had. And you patched everything back in, called the mix back up on the faders. Like, sounds good. And you just did another mix right there and then, you know, and it got done. And it may have been a different mix than the other mix, but it was absolutely perfect.
It was close enough. I mean, luckily it was the adrenaline of, oh my God, it didn't print, gave me enough mental energy to remember. And it was only a few minutes. So I remembered where all the patch came, you know what I mean? So it wasn't like, it was a distant memory. So got everything back up. And I remember let's just do it now. There was something in me that just said, it's okay. Let's just do it.
Yeah. And the reason I brought that story up more so not to illustrate what you actually did, but what you taught me and what I think a lot of other people can really relate to is that do it in the moment, do it while you're there. And I always think of that moment when I'm in a situation where I'm like, I'm tired and I want to go to bed or something. And I can just do this tomorrow. No, I always think of you as like Brian shows up on my shoulder, like, hey, it's all cool. And then I'll do that thing. And the next morning when I wake up, I'm so happy that I did it while I was in the moment, because tomorrow's another moment, another day, a whole different set of variables, Yeah,
you can always do it again, but sometimes there's the late night thing that sometimes when you're on a roll, even though you're super tired, there's something that happens where you're not overthinking, or any number of things can happen, but it's always important to get that.
Yeah. So that was a great one, man. And thank you again for that album. I think still stands as a timeless record.
Yeah, I think so. I actually
in Sonic,
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I played Holland's Tunnel for somebody not too long ago, and that or Blur or both. I'm like, oh, this is really cool, and I was like, yeah, this was a lot of fun, And I just remember, was it Britt? I think we went to Britt's house and played it for him, and he was like, "That's a live drummer," and I was like, well, that's Ari. Like, so yeah,
Ari Honig.
Yeah. So he's just on a whole nother stratosphere of.
That's a whole nother story which we can go into, but the particular track we're talking about, Blur, that you can check out at 1K Recordings, bandcamp.com. go there to Jazz Heads Avant Whatnot and listen to Blur. And that morning before we tracked that, we were listening to jungle and drum and bass on a boombox. And Ari's like, yeah, I'd never heard it before. Let's check it out. So he was listening to like drum and bass stuff, and which was all chopped up James Brown loops and stuff like that, you know, double speed. And he was like, oh yeah, hey Jim, do you have an extra drum, snare drum? And he's tuning him, and he's like, he starts playing like this, and we're like, yeah, man.
Yeah. Yeah. Like 5 minutes of listening to like LTJ Bookham or one of those guys, and he was like, I get it. And that was it. You know, that was awesome.
Cut that track, you know,
yeah,
completely jingle stick all the way through. It was just,
yeah, that was killing.
And I still love that track. And
that was, you know, I tell people all the time, you know, we all know we would love to sit in a room with an old Neve all the time and this, that, and the other thing. But sometimes it's good to just always try and get the most out of what you have, which we've always done, I think. Always. You know, and that was a Mackie 32.8 ADATs and like a couple of, I think he had the Fern mic pre's and a couple of other things. I don't want to get too much into gear, but the fact is that like the majority of that was just mixed. It was like his Echo plate, an H3000, a Mackie 32.8, and ADATs. That was it.
It's amazing, you know.
Yeah.
I still listen to that album and wonder. And then moving to the next recording we did was Global Illage Sushi Love Sessions.
That was a life changer. That's the only way I can describe that.
And you know, Chris and I talked about that yesterday. We were all improvising up to that point, but that was the first moment, I think, when we all realized the idea of group improvisation or composition in the moment or whatever you want. But we were truly exploring. You know, it was like, okay, there's no map. Let's go. Let's start at this entrance to this forest and see what we find.
Yeah. I mean, as soon as when I was like, so what's the material? Well, there is none. And knowing all of you guys, I was like, oh yeah. You know, I wasn't like, oh boy. I was like, immediately felt super comfortable and just super excited because for me, as what I do, it's like capturing people. If they don't know what they're doing and there's all these instruments around and you've got your dual amp set up, and Jim basically had this idea for a kit and we just kind of went with that.
Oh my God.
The non-traditional drum kit. He's like, I'm gonna kind of sit on the floor, sit on a cajon and like whack it with my heel. And he had all these little frame drum tambourines, as you know. And it was just fun. It was one of those things where, you know, Jim and I talk about this quite often, and so do we, but it's just a little tiny tambourine and just listening to it and you hear it out in the room and it's like, tick, tick, tick. And you're like, yeah, that's cool, but something else is going on there, you know? So I was like, well, let me try this. And we put a small, a KM84 Neumann, a small diaphragm condenser microphone underneath. And then I went in and heard it and I was like, okay. And then just messed around with it. And then, you know, found that low frequency in there and just killed it. And all of a sudden it was, you know, a gigantic 808. And Jim was like, and he played it completely differently once he heard it in the headphones like that. It became a different thing.
Boom.
You know? Yeah. And it's funny when people hear that record and then Jim shows them, you know, this little clear tambourine. Like, what is that drum? It's this. No, it's not. You know, so it's like, you know, that kind of stuff. And then having everything from buckets of water to shanais to all kinds of amazing stuff that Chris and Dan got down with. And then you, with your whole palette, it was just, you know, the only thing for me was I was in the control room by myself while all this stuff is being captured, like wanting to share this like instant improvisational stuff that was just, you know, I remember even a few times there was like a lull in your loop and I was hearing something and I just like went inside like very quietly and like moved a mic and then ran back in because I was like, wait, hold on, this needs to move. And just, you know, you can't really hear it. I can't remember what song it was, but things like that. And it was just, there was so much amazing stuff going on. So I was just making sure that there were microphones all over the place.
Yeah.
That coincided with each other, you know, to where they weren't, you know, conflicting sonically with each other, but there was just so much cool stuff going on in that. And it was a basement, so it was fairly dry. so you could do a
Yeah.
lot of stuff, which was cool.
As I recall, if memory serves, we were pretty tight on one another.
Oh yeah.
But it was baffled with these tall plastic screens
Yeah.
all around us. So we had sight lines. Like
Hmm.
horns were there, I was here, and Jim was there, but we could all see each other and hear each other in the cans.
Yeah.
And we were just gone. I still remember just playing that, and
Yeah.
I think we recorded for a couple days, maybe. I can't
Yeah.
really remember.
Oh,
But
it was 2 days. Yeah, 2 or 3 for sure.
yeah, and again, the sonic nature of that album that was coming from the musicians, and how you mic'd it, and how you and Jim discussed the setup of where all the musicians are, where the mics are, what mics to use. And
Yeah.
still, that's another one of those memories that it was like everything was magic. The team was there,
Yeah.
and the result was new music that none of us had ever heard of, or heard or experienced ever in our lives. That was like a beginning point for all of us, I feel like.
Absolutely, no question. And just like it reiterates like the hang part of things, I think, as well. Like the title says it all, like the Sushi Love. It was like we weren't just like. I mean, we recorded at least 10 hours a day, but it wasn't straight. There would be like, all right, like set up and like 3-4 hours. Man, that was intense. That was a cool. Let's take a second and go have some sushi, and then just kind of chill out and let it breathe for a minute. And then when you came back, and then it was like,
So inspired.
yeah, it wasn't even like, no one was like, well, what do you want to start with? It was just like, whoever was the first, I think it was usually you, like you would just go in and be like, and there were no words. It was just, man, that was a great dinner. And then you just hit your loop button. And then it was like, I'm like, I record. And then I was like, here we go again, and it was just very, very inspiring in so many ways to just have just instant, like no words, just instant, improvisation.
Yeah.
But everyone super kind of intensely paying attention not to step on anybody else, which is so important.
The listening was so deep.
It was.
And the chemistry of that band, those four people together,
Yeah.
and the influences, or the history of their music, of each person's music life coming together with you there, with your vibe, and with you capturing it. Wow, it was just it's just one of those moments in life. It's like,
Yeah.
we have lots of, we live our lives, and then occasionally there's this spike. It's like, wow.
Right.
Then you keep going, and then whoa, and then there's a bunch of lows, but that was one of the really high points, looking back, and we're always looking forward. So, but when we do look back, it's good to acknowledge that, because just profound things shaped our lives, those moments, and those hangs, and those recording sessions, and that music that still lives, which is a beautiful thing.
And then we're on the 10-year cycle, I guess, as it were, because that's what you guys talked about yesterday as well with Kuzmi. But you guys went 10 years after that, the Sushi Love. You went to Portland, played the festivals, and then again Prince comes into the equation again, and you recorded it at the Portland sessions at his studio.
That was beautiful.
Oh, that sounded great. And then I got to mix that in Philly, so that was really fun to
What
kind
was
of.
funny about that session is that when Dan invited us out to that festival to play, there was no way we could quote unquote rehearse. And we just wanted to play together because we hadn't played together for 10 years.
Right.
And we were flying out to Portland to do this big festival. So somehow Prince got into the equation. It's like, oh, we could maybe rehearse there. We asked him if we could rehearse there. And then Jim and I think we said, well, if we're going to be rehearsing, we might as well record everything.
Right.
And that's what we did. And, it was really our rehearsal, our warming back into one another. And what we found was, it was still there. That thing.
Oh, yeah.
Was just there, So that was exciting. And it's exciting to think about doing this again, like maybe this summer, the cycles. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to them when we can get our schedules together and do that. I think that will be great, especially in the third installment Jim's got a new studio, bigger space. Everybody's 10 years old. It's just so many. It all just makes sense, you know.
A lot of life experience has happened in the last 10 years.
And coming out of this last year, I think we just all need it. You know, I think
Well
it's
said.
so important. It's so important to just kind of, you know, what better time to have a reunion of those 5 people
Yeah.
when we all need it. So, you know.
Well, you know, it's like so we talked about these two projects and some current projects that hopefully will be coming this summer with Global Illage. And I was also curious, you know, you were on, you know, the recording studio scene in New York City for a while, and certainly bopping around in Philly, but then you went out to Los Angeles at some point, right?
Yes, 2004.
And you were there, what, 10 years or something?
10 and a half years, yeah.
And
That decade.
tell me about that experience and what was it that took you out there?
I spent my 30s there. Basically, it was like, you know, like I grew up in Essex County, New Jersey, and then New York was, you know, as a kid, but like in my 20s, playing, recording, all that stuff. And then after Elwood, like it was like right around the time of like just post Napster, and like studio and iTunes was starting, so all that stuff was going on, like you know, just 2002ish. And I was just like, well, I always kind of had California in the back of my mind, and I had a few friends there, and I said, well, you know what? And I think now's the time, because we weren't going to put out another record with Elwood, unfortunately. And then, and we had a ball, you know, we toured and did all that fun stuff, and the record did fairly well. But the studios were, there was an inkling of some of them starting to close down in New York, and I was just I was working a day job at a dealership, because I grew up in a car dealership, so I was doing that during the day when I wasn't doing freelance stuff at night, like wholesaling cars and things like that. And I was just like, well, like I'm either gonna, you know, do this and see what happens with New York, or it's a perfect time for me to just kind of jet to LA and with not much, and see what I can make of it, because, you know, I think I was 29 or just turned 30.
Yeah.
And went out there and, you know, hung out with friends and started to, you know, network and all that stuff. And it was great. I was in Venice Beach for the majority of it, and then Hermosa a little bit. And it was wonderful. It was so cool. You know, I got to work in some cool studios, met a lot of great people, played in quite a few bands with some really cool people. I had, you know, played with Sly Stone's daughter. She had a band for a while.
That's great.
She's now the DJ on Morning Becomes Eclectic, Novena Carmel. But she's
wow,
amazing singer, and everybody in that band. It was kind of funny, because that was like, okay, my friend, amazing producer, guitar player, Itai Shapiro was a guitar player, and he's like, hey man, do you want to, Jeff, the amazing bass player, he was going on tour doing some MD work in Japan or whatever, so like, you want to, you know, come hang for an audition? I was like, yeah, whatever. And I was not, you know, classically trained. I'm not a jazz player. I just kind of play by feel and just practiced a lot. And we all vibed, but it was like Sly's daughter was singing amazing, all these other cats, and then Kebmo's son, Kevin Roosevelt, was the drummer. So I was like, only in LA am I playing in a band with Kebmo's son playing drums and Sly's daughter singing. You know, it was surreal. Yeah. And we had a ball. You know, we played a ton of shows, and those guys are great, all super mega talented musicians. And, you know, played in like a few other bands, and, you know, produced a lot of like solo projects and things like that. And then also worked, I kind of caught the education bug there a little bit. I worked for a very small like boutique recording school for a minute and taught a few classes, and that was fun. And then at the same time, I was also working at like a little studio in Hollywood and meeting a whole bunch of gear designers, you know, like, so it was like really cool to kind of see all the new gear. Kind of got me back into that a little bit. And, you know, Pro Tools was really, and like Melodyne and pop music was heading in a whole different direction. So for me, I had to kind of relearn and as we all did, oh, okay, well, if I want to keep getting sessions, I got to know how to tune the vocals. I got to, drum replace, which thankfully for me didn't last too long. 'Cause not my thing, but, so you did all that stuff and it was great. I learned so much from watching all these amazing engineers who were completely different and had a completely different approach than me. And then, that kind of happened for a while. And then I got lucky, and this is like another good story in terms of, if you love being in the studio, it doesn't matter what you're doing, because I got a gig in Santa Monica at the old Flight Time studio, which was Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis's place.
Wow.
They sold it. Yeah. And they had 5 rooms. It was insane. And it was like a writer's paradise, but Jimmy had a room, Terry had a room, and they were like the bigger rooms. And then there was like 3 other studios for writing. And it was filled with, you name it, like Rihanna did a record there. And so what would happen was like all these pop groups and Timberland, and I mean, so many people, Mary J, like you name it, it's like that kind of joint. And they were looking for an assistant, but they were smart. They were like, we want to hire engineers who are good engineers who are okay with, just kind of jumping in and being an assistant. And I was like, yeah, sure. So what happened was I would assist a little bit. And then when these writing camps would come in, they needed engineers to record the songwriters. You'd have an artist who would be in one of the main rooms. And then, there's like 4 other rooms with, the 4 biggest producers and the 4 biggest writers and top liners or whatever. So they needed a Pro Tools engineer. So I was like, okay. So I started doing that. And that was really fun for a while. Got to work on some cool stuff and meet a lot of people. But for me, it was, and we had talked about this, it was really fun. And I saw so many guys that were just like, that was all they wanted to do, and they wanted to kind of hook up, like the thing there is, you hook up with an artist and maybe they'll want you as, their personal engineer, which is a fantastic gig. But I just didn't see myself working, constantly through the night and working on just sitting there running, in Pro Tools world. Mixing is different for me, but like just tracking and editing vocals all day, all night, and beat oriented stuff is fantastic for some people, but for me, it's just not.
It can be really tedious, right?
Well, yeah, I think, Kuzmi put it best yesterday. I mean, he was like, you kind of made a decision where, you want to play the music that you like. You don't want to get paid playing other people's music. And I still have all this other stuff I want to do, i.e. beer making, or for me, it's, mixing and it got into education. So I wanted to do that. I was like, I think I have enough experience and cool stuff to pass on, even though, and that's the thing. I mean, I've learned equally as much from people who have a lot of experience, but nobody knows their name than people, there's a Mount Olympus of producers and engineers, and it's hard to, there's so many other people that are just as good, but either didn't get lucky or whatever the case may be, so I mean, it's like I always listen to anyone, especially my students too, because they have a completely different perspective on it. So so that kind of came into my brain where I was like, this is great, but got married, want to have a baby, and I was like, I can't be getting calls at 11:30 p.m. Can you be here in a half an hour? Like, so which is literally a lot. So I was like, okay. And then went to Philly for a year with Jim while he was kind of helped, quote unquote, with whatever I could do to help get the building up. And then we ended up, my wife and I, having a baby, and just for steady money purposes and stuff, got offered a job at LA Film School teaching and the music production online department here in Florida. And I've been here for 6 years, got my master's degree, because I was like, if I'm going to stay in education, you got to jump up the level just to open up more opportunities. It's kind of funny how that is. I think it's going to change a little bit eventually, where, you have so many people who are super experienced, and then you have so many people who have all the pieces of paper, and the people who have both are very, very, very little, because the people who are doing it, who want to get into academia, are so busy doing that. And the people who are doing it, for a career, are so busy doing that. So it's tough.
It's
but
such a great illustration that you just made. Yeah.
It's tough. So, Yeah. So for me, it was just like, I'm getting my master's. I have no interest in getting a PhD. I'd rather work. But now working I'm teaching online as well as at Stetson University here in Florida, which is a fantastic music school, fantastic university. Um, and, having the luxury of, making a living as an educator allows me to, getting back to what Kuzmi said, work on the things that I've always just wanted to work on,
Exactly.
which is working with you, working with Mark Borden, working with Kuzmi, working with Dave. Like, we just have a huge community of friends
Yeah.
that are still working on records, and it's all really great stuff, and we all want to work on stuff together. So it just it's it takes a while to get to where you need to be, to where you can go. I'm
Yeah.
happy with my gig because it's still doing what I love, but
Going the same direction in a way.
right. And it's not, I don't have to rely constantly on getting out there and taking a lot of records that, you get to a certain age and it's just like, 20 years ago, I would mix anything and love it and concentrate on it. And I think for me,
it makes sense at that time,
yeah, and I'm super into all different kinds of music, but for me, it's like, with the amount of time that I have now, I'd rather just concentrate on, and it's proven to make me better at what I do, because there's nothing in the back of my head that's stressing about anything,
Yeah.
like,
Except
just,
your own personal will to make it the best thing it can be.
yeah, I kind of came full circle to when I was, like back in the chair when we were mixing Illage or Jazz Heads, you know what I mean? It was like, there was no label or like 9,000, mixes for, it was just, it was us, and it was just, let's make it as cool as possible. And, sky's the limit on creativity. Like, we tried everything. Remember, I think was it 2 or 3 of the tracks on the ill side, it was, okay, we've got 24 tracks of ADAT mixed. Let's bounce that, let's bounce it to DAT, and then rebounce it onto 2 tracks of ADAT, and let's put some overdubs on it, and let's just blow this one out.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay,
That was beautiful. Beautiful experiments happened.
Oh yeah, it was great.
That idea. But I wanted to get back to what you were just saying about both you and Chris echoed the idea of doing you and finding yourself. That's what this is about, searching for sparks. It's been something that I've been doing as well. It's like, I think at some point you have to say no to all the things, can come and do this, come and do that, because it's not where you want to go. It's not what you want to do. And it's important to hone in on the music that you want to do.
Yeah.
And by doing that, then your pathway actually opens.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, you're getting pulled left and right constantly. You're in the trenches. And as soon as that happens, and if you have auxiliary jobs like education, or I work with dancers at University Arts in Princeton sometimes, and that's something I love to do, because it's still a component of improvisation, composing, collaboration, and so these things are all forward movements. And I think as we all figure that out in our lives, life starts happening.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that it's easy.
Oh no.
It may be more difficult in a way, but you have to hang on to that course, and it'll work out. You manifest who you are and where you're going, something like that.
Yeah, it's just just do you, right? Exactly. I mean, it's so simple, but it's so true. And just not even worrying about too much, and just keep your eye on what you want to do, and keep your focus on what you're doing. And sometimes, I know I've had a tendency to be like, all right, well, I'm doing this right now, but then what am I going to do next month? Or things like that,
Yeah.
So, and just keep it, I just try to just focus on one thing at a time, and just being yourself. And especially with, mixing, I mean, like, your stuff has really kind of just kept me going in terms of learning and trying new things, and you know, also keeping it, it's always just about what the artist is supposed to be, more than anything. Talk about searching for sparks. It's like I searched through a song. It's all about the song, and then I'm like, okay, there's something in there that I'm like, I didn't hear that before. So let me pull that up and see what that does. That kind of thing.
A
And
great illustration is, and maybe we should talk about it a little bit, the solo album that you just finished mixing.
yeah,
And
let's do that.
um, one of my favorite moments was sending you demos of 10 songs that I had. And, I was thinking like maybe Brian would want to mix these or whatever. I don't know what's going to happen, but I have these songs, and I hadn't sung in a long time, really, and so it was my first song record. It's coming out, and so before that all happened, I had my little studio, I call them wobbly demos, and I sent them to Brian, and I'll never forget this. You were like, dude, this is your hunky dory.
Yep.
And you said, I'd love to mix this record, and I was just like, wow, really? And
yeah.
And so now where we are, and this is kind of an announcement, but the album is called Many Ways Around the Sun. It's my first solo record, as I just said, and it's coming out on Rope-A-Dope July 30th this summer, and with some singles this month and singles next month. So
super exciting.
It's unbelievable, and that's a form of manifestation. It's like the fact that you showed love to that record, and we had this these beautiful few months going through the mix and files going back and forth, and dealing with all these songs.
Yeah, and it's amazing. I mean, I guess it's a testament to just friendship, but it's the easiest experience. Even everybody always says, well, it's tough to just go back and forth with just email and things like that, but we talked a lot. We'd have video chats and things like that, and I thought it was like super smooth. And it's one of those things where it's just like, yeah, it's just us doing what we do, and it's like, I think this should be louder. Okay, let's try that. Or this. It's all about the what's best for the tune, which is what I care about.
It was really fun, actually. And
I thought it was great. Yeah.
The fact that we couldn't hang in the same room and mix, and we might have wanted to, but the fact that we could hang like this and have a deep discussion about a tune like Many Ways Around the Sun or whatever, and dial into that, and that was, so memorable, and the outcome is like, I'm so excited for us, firstly, because we achieved what the album was meant to be, I feel. Yeah. And for the few people that have heard it, they've been, they felt it deeply. And, I think that starts from us feeling it deeply first.
Yeah.
And then it's going to be released. And from there, it's out of your control. But it's an exciting process to go through and to birth yet another new work, and it couldn't have been done, and it wouldn't have been done, and it wouldn't have sounded like it does without you being there,
Well, thank you.
Brian, I'm saying this to you, but everybody, Brian brings the love and the soul to whatever he works on. And that is the truth, so
I'm just making sure it sounds like how you put it down. I may occasionally find a few things, that's why I love that you give me all this. Like, I'm just going to give you all this stuff. And I was like, okay, and you're like, where'd that guitar come from? And it's like, okay, well, you did it, but you may have not remembered. I mean, I do that all the time. So it's like just having another person that you trust, I'll do that with mixes too. I'll send something to somebody and be like, hey, what do you think of this? Am I crazy? Because sometimes, I've never been really unless it's a specific type of project, like to reference, try and make it sound exactly like something else, or what's hot or what's new, and or what, like that's not, I'm not concerned with that. So it's like, I'll go back and listen to something completely different just to give me a sonic, idea of where I want to go with what I'm working on. But in terms of just being something, I don't really do that. Only reason I do that is if I'm in like a new control room and I put on something I've listened to 10,000 times and I know what it sounds like or what it's
It's a,
supposed to sound like. That's different, but
it's a
you know,
reference.
yeah. But I think for especially with this stuff, it was like as soon as I heard it, I was like, well, this just got to sound like Tim in the basement, just getting ill. Like that's kind of what and making the song because when people hear it, I think they're gonna love it because the songs really speak for themselves.
There's a song called "Deeper Than Anything," which is the title track. It's kind of like, I don't know how I think about it, but it's kind of a I guess I'd call it an overture, maybe an overture
Yeah,
to the record. It opens up the album, and it's about the whole planet and love of humanity and that kind of thing. But the thing that you found or did on that track, it was exactly what you're talking about. At some point, you found a lead guitar part that I had buried because, this is the great thing about when you're self-producing. You're like, you play this shit, and then you're like, I think that sucks. So you keep the part up that you like, the solo, and then you bury the rest. That's what
right.
I did in this case.
Yeah,
And handing these tracks off to you, part of the fun was to know that it would go through your lens, and you'd be like, "What you got in there?" So you pulled up that whole guitar track, and it became a counter line all the way from like the middle section all the way to the end. It was a counter line to the vocal, and it was like, wow! And it just made the track that you found that. And it was something that I discarded. And one of the things that's interesting, I remember reading a book about Walt Disney. And he had all these artists that were illustrating and doing stuff at desks, and every day when they would leave, he would walk around and reach in their trash cans and pull out these amazing illustrations and go, "Why'd you throw this away?" And
right.
you see it the next day. But that's what you do. You find magic that one person dealing with all this stuff, and then you have a team, and then boom.
Yeah, it's worth it to go through everything, and you know what? It's like that's the joy of what we do. It's like I feel like, well, you know what? I'm not feeling that. Okay, mute, move on, go to the next thing, or God, I forgot I did that. And you always, for every 100 times you dig through tracks that somebody muted, there's at least 5% of the time it's going to be like, where'd you find that? So it's worth it. Um, searching for sparks, right? Searching is the key word. Like, you find
Yeah,
something when a 1 out of 100 times, it's worth it.
yeah.
So, you know, um, yeah, I always do that because I just muted that, or it's like the old, okay, yeah, I'm just gonna warm up, don't record. Right. You know, it's always that one that's usually, not always, but a lot of times it's when you don't think you're being recorded, you nail it. Right.
And you're not thinking about anything. As
Sure.
soon as the record light goes on, you're like, oh, I got to play this track really good. And
Yeah.
when you're not recording, you're just like playing. That's how it's supposed to be anyway. You
Yeah.
know.
Yep.
So it's just an amazing process. This process of handing something over. Normally, we'd be in a room and we'd be having a great time there, and just this and that. But this is just like a process that is just delayed a little bit longer, and it's still the back and forth, and we've adapted to it
Yeah.
in this way through internet chats and just sending files, and it's kind of the way records are made now in a way.
Yeah.
But
It's true.
um,
I do miss it though. Like it's always nice to, um,
in
you
the
know,
same room.
when we're in the same room, but also, like it'll be like, okay, if we're mixing a record, like even with Jazz Heads or whatever it was, it'd be like, okay, guys, give me an hour, like just alone, right? And then it's like, let me see what I can do, right? And then it's like, okay, and then everybody comes back, and then there's different fluctuations of, all right, now I need everybody, especially pre-automation on the ADATs. It was like, you take those faders, and we'll take that, and we'll mute
Yeah,
this, and we'd rehearse a mix, old school style, and that's so awesome, and I miss that, and I can't wait
yeah,
to do it again. But this definitely works. We found a way to. Um, just make sure, especially with the video stuff, it's great. You can just be like, man, this is killer. Or, even just pulling up the Pro Tools session. You're like, yeah, just dip it down right there. Okay. It just
yeah.
saves time. So yeah, it's been great. I'm looking forward to more. and this way and in person, of course.
Yeah.
We've got some other stuff on the horizon too, so it'll be nice.
Yeah, we can talk about this too just for a second. Brian currently has the next Orion Tango album on his laptop or your tower, and it's some melting stuff. But I just wanted to say, I just wanted to say the last track that you sent, which has a working title of Roadkill.
Roadkill, yeah.
That may change, but it's pretty heavy stuff, and but harmonically beautiful, and
yeah.
and I just wanted to tell you what you achieved on that particular mix that I love is like when I was playing, when we were all playing in the studio, it was me, Barry Meehan, and Jeremy Carlstedt. We were all playing this track, all improv, and I remember playing fifths. I'm moving on fifths around the guitar, thinking that Barry is going to reharmonize those fifths in different ways. And I was doing these shifts, like a half step, just to see what kind of harmonic accidents would happen.
Right.
And when you mixed it, you blended it. So that's exactly what's happening. It's like you still have my riff moving around, but you have Barry's thing turning these riffs into major seventh chords and stuff like that. And it's just so beautiful, but killing.
Yeah. That was perfectly said. It's so beautiful, but killing. Yeah, it was one of this record especially. I mean, I love the first two. They're just amazing. And this one, like just the way, Barry even said it to me too. He's like, yeah, this one's a little, it's kind of a melter. And I'm like, yeah. And like, so it's like everyone kind of alluded to the same thing of like, this one's a little heavier than the last two. I don't know what was in the water that day or what have you. But so I was like, oh, I know what I'm going to do. This will be fun, and just kind of take that whole aesthetic of you guys down in the basement and just inflate it a little bit, and it just kind of worked because, I mean, the performances are so fun, and they're just so, and beautiful. So it was fun to just kind of put the pedal down a little bit, and I'm looking forward to getting that out into the world as well.
Some of those tunes were inspired by my Uncle Fred, and I don't know if you ever heard the story, but maybe when I was like 12 or something, he took me, maybe 13, he took me to the record shop because I wanted to pick up Black Sabbath's Master of Reality that had just come out that week.
Oh, wow.
He's like, yeah, I'll take you over there. So he takes me over there. I get out and I walk in, and it's like, it's a record store with lava lamps and black lights and black light posters on the wall. And you go in, and it's Hamilton, Ohio. There's not going to be quantity of any record. It's going to be like one copy of it. Right. And there it is, Master of Reality. And I get it, and I buy it, and I take it into the room. I think it was like $4.95 when I bought it, And I took it into my uncle's car, and he's like, "What did you get?" And I held up the album cover. I'm like, Master of Reality. He goes, whoa, what the hell? So a few weeks later, I think Sabbath was on, maybe it was a few weeks later, but whatever the story was, they were on the California Jam, and I recorded them on cassette, and they were doing stuff off of Master Reality. So I was so happy, and I loved Sabbath at that time. And so I remember taking that cassette in his car. We were going somewhere, and he goes, "What the hell are you playing?" I said, "This is Black Sabbath. Remember the album I got?" And he goes, "Sounds like a bunch of damn lawnmowers, And I've never forgotten that. And that story, I've told Barry that. So whenever we play in that way, we think of lawnmowers now, and that's where the title Bush Hog came from, kind of
okay.
In tribute to Uncle Fred and lawnmowers, because where I grew up, it was just lawnmowers in the summertime everywhere running. And
right.
a bush hog will dig up the dirt and the roots and everything, So that's kind of like what that track does. So when people hear the album, they'll understand the story better.
That's a great story. I love that. Yeah.
But Uncle Fred,
That's so cool. Yeah, so many things influence so many other things. It's crazy how it, that connected to that particular song is just insane, right?
the things that keep us going and connect us to our past and why
Yeah.
things show up now and all that kind of thing. But man, I wanted to ask you maybe one last question for
Sure.
this could be part one. Maybe there'll be a part two as well.
I think that would be fun. Yeah.
Dig in deeper to recording. But
Sure.
if you could give some advice to some musicians, to recordists, people getting going right now, searching for the spark, what could you recommend?
Well, I just think it's important to obviously be yourself, and I think go out there and make sure that you're studying the right stuff. I think, and then also taking time to absorb what you've studied. Take a break from always learning the next thing, especially with the internet, specifically for people going in like to studio engineering, or nowadays it's just more music production because everybody kind of starts in their house and doesn't, have the luxury of a studio anymore down the street, which 20 years ago was a lot easier. In Philly, it's different, in a major market, but just if you're going to go on YouTube and you're not going to go to school and teach yourself, like just make sure you don't go down a hole, and be yourself, and don't take this stuff as this is like, learn to separate the fundamentals from the creative stuff. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where that's the way this guy does it, but that's, once you go past, the fundamentals, like in theory or audio, music theory or audio, then it's like, that's the way that guy does it. But you don't have to do it like that. You know what I mean? Try it, because you're going to take all kinds of stuff. I mean, I've learned so many different tricks from so many different people and techniques, or whatever you want to call it. And then eventually it just becomes this gigantic ball of this Rolodex of creative stuff that you have in the back of your head. And then every time you take it out, you kind of put more paint on it, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, this guy used to do this and I love doing that, so I'm going to take that out of my brain and I'm going to do it, but now I'm doing it differently. So I'm going to adjust that and put it back in my Rolodex. You know what I mean? That kind of thing in my brain. So it's constantly changing,
Yeah.
even though the meat and potatoes are still the same. So just make sure and don't be afraid to do anything. That's so important. Don't be afraid.
Important.
There's nothing wrong with failing, because that's where it all comes from anyway. I mean, I blew that mix up too much, or whatever the case may be. It's it's always a learning experience, and it just makes you better. So
go over the edge. You can always
always come back.
Someone said this, I don't know if it was Eno or Bowie, but when you're recording, you can always crash the car, but you can get out of it and walk away, and you'll be fine.
Yeah, exactly.
So go crash the car, right?
Right. Yeah, and it's so important, and I think we do that. I mean, you guys definitely do it in the performances, but I think with the studio stuff too, it's let's try this is always a popular phrase, isn't it?
Or no discussion at all. We just jump off the cliff together with no parachutes and like try to make something happen or let it happen. We're through the listening and the clues, Jeremy playing a certain way, and all of a sudden he's like, oh, okay, I'm in that, and suddenly I'm in there, and things suddenly open, and we're off and running with no words said, but kind of like a vibe, a feeling about where we're trying to go, we think, and what could open up from starting where we went from,
Yeah, and that's like, I think I'll end with that too. I mean, for me, when I'm listening to something, when I pull it up the first time to get like an overall balance of a mix, like the technical stuff is kind of buried in the back of my mind. It's all about the song. Where is it taking me? I'm not like, I have to make that snare drum sound better than anybody else's.
Yeah.
No, I need to make this sound like what I think the artist is trying to get across. And that's it.
Yeah. I watched I'm going to send this to you, a link of an interview with John Leckie. Do you know John Leckie?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's a great 2.5 hour interview that I watched. And in that interview, he says exactly that, because they were asking him about his mentality about doing like Bebop Deluxe Records or XTC or whatever it was, or working with the Beatles. He's like, he's like, I didn't know. I never thought about the technical aspect of anything. I was just there and doing it and,
Right.
you know, winging it and feeling like I'm just going to do what I feel. And he goes, and that is the way, you know, it's like, you know, it's like we learn everything as a guitar player and then we forget everything and then we go play.
Yeah, you learn it it's like, you know, if the guy, like, you know, Sergeant Pepper's wouldn't have sounded like Sergeant Pepper's if those guys didn't learn how to play, or the engineer didn't learn the fundamentals and then go, let's break this and see what happens. Right. You know, so
bass.
yeah, right, exactly. So yeah, man, I think we can definitely have a whole nother part to this fun.
Yes. So I drink to that. Part two. We'll get into recording more and creativity more. And this has been a beautiful hang, just like an overview and a history and a few stories. And
yeah, I hope it's not too boring for people. I know it's great for us, but I think they'll get a kick out of it.
I think so too. And you know, more than anything, it's a document of some of our time spent, and they've been beautiful times and so much love, man. Thank you so much. You know,
this has been great.
As I said to Kuzmi yesterday, I'm glad you're on the planet, and that goes for you as well. You know,
right back at you, man. I mean, this is just, it's funny to say it, but it's always feels like it's just the beginning for all of us, because even though it's been almost 25 years, it's, you know, it's still going. I don't see any end in sight. So
it is. Yeah. Music for life.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right. Cool.
Brian, take care.
You too. Thanks everybody for listening, and looking forward to part two.
Indeed. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see you soon.
All right.
Bye.